Hi, Jacquie Bryant here, and I'm recording this video that should be about 15 minutes long in order to give a broad overview of how IVA implements a character education model. Now, when we seek people and people select to join our school, they are the kind of people that are drawn to the language of intellectual virtues and even for our own development. Like, we want to be people who grow in the way that we think. And even so, even if you find it compelling, there's a bit of a jump between finding intellectual virtues compelling and imagining how that plays out in a classroom setting on a daily basis, let alone in a school setting. So the goal of this video is to kind of give a glimpse into that. And then let me just ground us. Everything that we do at the school implements our mission and our vision. So our mission is to foster meaningful growth in intellectual character virtues in what is a thoughtful, challenging, and supportive academic environment. Everything that we're doing pursues that mission. And the reason that we have the mission is because we have a vision that once students leave us, they will be equipped to engage the world with curiosity and thoughtfulness, to know themselves and to live well. So the next couple slides are aiming at opening or bringing more awareness to what that means. So every time that we get together, what you'll learn when we get together in person, we start things with a big question in our classrooms, in our advisories, in our parent academies, in our professional development. Everything has a big question. So the questions in this video is, why do the concepts of intellectual character and intellectual virtues matter? What might it look like for IVA to educate for intellectual virtues in a deliberate, systematic way in each of our positions, whether you're a teacher or school leader, behavior support, any of our positions? So here are some of the goals of this, is that in this 15 minutes, we would have time to learn and consider and think deeply. Not enough time for that, but think deeply about the impacts of intellectual character development and the makeup of our program. To engage in self-reflection. So there will be moments where I say, this is what we would do in person, and so you can pause that if you want to, but these are the sort of routines and practices that we will do in person together. We engage in self-reflection and self-assessment aimed at our own growth in intellectual character. And then we consider how a focus on intellectual virtues adjusts our approach to thinking, learning, relationships, behavior support. And then also the goal of any time that we get together, it's that we're practicing the values of our organization in our interaction. Okay, so the first thing that I would have you do that you're not doing is some sort of a quick humanizing invitation to step in and to get to know each other. So because this is about sort of what the aim of schooling has been over time, the first question that I would ask of you is, what is the aim of schooling that you've experienced and the impact on you? So like, what was the relationships with school that you had as youth? The messages you were told, whether they were intentional or unintentional about who you are as a person. And then also like to warm our hearts and remind us why we're in education. An educator who saw the best in you, and how and why and what made the difference. And after we have these short conversations, we would get into groups of 3 or 4. And we would use this practice called a micro-lab protocol, where every person has 2 minutes to just talk out all of the things they've been thinking or hearing, 10 seconds of silence, until all the members of the group have shared. That is a protocol or a thinking routine. We'll come back to that and why we do those in a moment. But first, educational aims. So schooling over time has aimed at a lot of different things. One of them is cognitive excellence, that students would leave our schools having some knowledge of content, practicing intellectual skills, and really like honing their native cognitive ability. But we also want our students to be kind and compassionate, respectful, tolerant. We want them to practice what are moral and civic excellences as a friend and as a neighbor. We want them to do that. And at IVA, the way that we have them do those practices over time, both cognitive excellence and moral civic excellence, is through the practice or aiming at intellectual virtues like curiosity, humility, and I won't read all of those, but at IVA we have 9 intellectual virtues that we center all of our learning and engagement around, because those virtues allow us to learn well. We're aiming at rigorous content, but also to live well. We're doing this within kindness and compassion. Because if you want to be curious about something, you want to pursue knowledge about it, you're doing so within a community where our curiosity asks us to act kindly with one another as we come up against people's ideas that are not our own. So we have to engage not only our intellectual habits and practices, but intellectual habits and practices have such crossover with our moral and civic habits and practices. That's just a quick review. And one thing I would ask you to do, or the sorts of things we ask you to do when we're in person, is something like a Connect Extend challenge. What's the information? And even on the next slides, I'm just going to give more information about character education. What do you connect with that you already knew, that you're like, oh, I get that? What kind of bullet points extend or broaden, deepen your thinking? And then what challenges you? So we don't want people who are just absorbing everything we tell them to absorb. We really want your questions, your concerns, your puzzles to be a part of our ongoing learning together. We're pursuing intellectual character, which describes the attributes of your personal character specifically related to thinking and learning. Your disposition to act and think and feel in good and excellent ways. So a little bit more about intellectual character. We need some understanding of how virtue formation, which is what we're after, occurs in order to meaningfully participate in the cultivation of virtue. So the reason that we talk about the theory, pedagogy is a combination of theory and practice. The reason we talk about the theory of intellectual character and virtues is because to understand that deeply will help us enact it in very cohesive ways. So character reflects who I am as a person. We said this on the last slide, but these are traits that are acquired over time. It's a formative long-term development. Our inner thoughts, feelings, attitudes, motives, choices, desires, they intersect with our capacity for thinking, learning, and understanding. Intellectual virtues are the personal qualities or character strengths of a good thinker and learner. Intellectual virtues are rigorous. They're asking us to think really well, but they are also personal. They aim at deep understanding through reflection, metacognition. And there's more to virtue than knowledge. If you can see in the fine print at the bottom here, there's more to virtue than just knowledge. Virtue is conceptually a thick framework. A virtue is the combination of your ability or your skill or competence with your motivation and your judgment. So for example, if you have the ability but you're not motivated, or you're doing so for your own personal gain, that is not virtue. Virtue is the good combination of all those things. With one other note on this page, character, virtue, vice is the opposite of virtue, aiming at negative things. They're not all or nothing. It's a matter of degree. So this is what we process together and also with our students. Teaching for intellectual virtues, so I'm just going to you can pause and read this, but I want to skip through. Teaching for intellectual virtues is content and skills in a certain way. It is education that's rigorous and personal. Okay, and then this is what I love. It relies on genuine care and concern for each of our students' psychological development. So it is the whole child. It is a holistic look. And so that's why intellectual virtues have this overlap of moral and civic too. It is inseparable from a deep love of truth and love of learning for its own sake. And it leads to flourishing. Okay, I'm going to scroll through these slides and you can pause, but just for sake of time, the character is what Phil Dow in his book Virtuous Minds describes as these mental ruts in our thinking that help us to think well and can be developed over time. So the big question, how do we implement intellectual character education? Well, at IVA, we implement it through what we consider enculturation. So there's 3 parts to that. I'm sure that there are more, but there's exemplars or models, practice habituation, fancy terms. I also think of this in terms of the opportunities we give kids, and then our direct instruction. So one of the things we love to say is that students grow into the intellectual life. They're surrounded by what is most important first are the educators and our own intellectual character development. And what is really hard, the tension that pushes against our own development, is that we're at a school where we get things done. And so Ron Richart, one of our favorite authors, says that a learning agenda will always take the backseat to a work agenda. If I could get something done, I will do that over thinking deeply and well. So IVA, we try to fight against this like work agenda by having common language, regular opportunities for self-reflection, and creating the environment we're after. And one of the ways that we do that is we ask for a virtue self-assessment. So every year at the beginning of the year, we ask all of our staff, every single person, what virtue do you feel like you practice well in your role? What does it look like? What virtue do you want to grow in, and what does that look like? And those are our goals for the year. And then even before the first day of school, we ask our teachers, what virtue do you think your subject matter requires from students? And then we ask teachers not to just give all the procedures and rules on the first day, but dig into very deep learning that allows kids to practice that virtue. So we frame ourselves. We make sure that we are pursuing intellectual character growth ourselves by always having a question, a resource, and a thinking routine. And we do this when we talk about the sort of like principles of process versus product, active versus passive learning, the postures, like the mindsets that I take as an educator towards students and learning and behavior, and our ongoing practices. Okay, and we always pull our resources from IVA's bookshelf, our favorite list of books that helps us pursue deep understanding of intellectual character and a culture of thinking. And we also use, so one of those is like framing principles from cultivating deep minds, but we'll use thinking routines like that in front of you. Again, pause if you want to look at them. Each of the routines that we use, we as a group got together and thought like, which of these routines helps us practice which of our virtues? So there's one routine called a See, Think, Wonder that we think really helps students practice curiosity and attentiveness in class. And we use these thinking routines in professional development, advisories, and teacher lesson planning. And these are our opportunities. So we take all of the things we try to aim at ourselves, the ways we set up our lessons, but in order to create opportunities. One of Ron Richard's book is Making Thinking Visible, using the thinking routines for opportunities for thinking. They have a very high ceiling, like we can aim at deep understanding, a low threshold though. They have really easy access for students to engage into them. Like, what do you see? Just tell me what you see. That creates a low risk learning environment, but it aims toward good thinking, especially as you listen to others and what they see. But then it's patterns and practice that happens over time and culturated in every opportunity, in every class, in every engagement, and it creates a culture of thinking. So, for example, teachers, instead of asking like, how do I deliver this content well, which was what I was trained in my credential program, we ask, how do we give students opportunities for deep thinking, for virtuous thinking with my content? So it's a little bit of a switch. And there's also a social, emotional element of these sort of like patterns of good thinking that we have found in the Life Compass Institute. So we'll be learning about that together. And then one of the ways that we do the direct instruction of virtues is through advisory. So we have 5 weeks of school where we start focusing with students on what we value, struggle, and then we talk about adolescence, what growth mindset is, how to navigate relationships and mental health, and like curiosity. And in advisory, we give students after 5 weeks, a small group of students in an ungraded time for them to pursue their own virtues. And my favorite part, so there's all the virtues, but we actually like study the virtues with students, like curiosity. How does somebody who's curious think or feel or act? So when we're doing the direct instruction in virtues, we have a very, very comprehensive advisory curriculum. We talk about Aristotle's golden mean. What does curiosity look like when it's too much in excess or when it's too little? And pause if you want to look at this, but there are weaknesses of direct instruction. That's why we do enculturation. It is the modeling, it is the opportunities, and it's direct instruction, but direct instruction has the possibility of boredom. So advisory, one of my favorite parts about it is that we ask students to have intellectual exploration and give opportunities for them to think about what they're curious about. And then we save some of those, like students have been interested in the multiverse, hope versus optimism, how to have difficult conversations. All of this is pursuing our values as a school. Everything that we do is aligned with our thinking and decision making, every particular thing. For example, our bell schedule is long blocks so that students have an opportunity for deep thinking. The practices that we do in class, it is about rigorous thinking, but it's also about listening to each other and having a time to reflect on our own thinking, our own metacognition, and then sharing that with each other. So we're aiming at the values of the school through an enculturation model. But then there's more. There's so many things that we do that continues systematically to implement this, like student leadership, family academies, events and celebrations. Our back to school is an experience of learning so that our parents can experience it. All of this is so that what we are pursuing is the long-term good patterns of behavior and thinking that are enculturated over time, the foundations of our intellectual character. Okay, I have a couple other slides. I'm just going to put them up there because we also have to protect ourselves as we're pursuing this character. This is the final way to reflect on this. I can't wait to have time together with you. Have a great day.